One of the biggest problems faced by writers is simply that of making time to write. Whether you're a published author or a beginner, there will always be other pressures on your time. So, in this podcast, we'll share some ideas on how you can make time for your art and keep a project moving forward when you have little time to contribute to it. Welcome to the Writer's Gym. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, welcome to the Writer's Gym.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Hello.
We are on location at Emily's house in Reading.
You are, yes.
And we've just been joking about procrastination because it takes so long to set up all the microphones and the kit. And inevitably we talk about other things while we're doing so, don't we?
We totally do. But the other thing that I really enjoyed about this particular example was we'd said, all of us at different times, we're going to start on time. This is what's going to happen at this time. This is what's going to happen at that time. It's now an hour or so after that time. And I'm so glad we did that because the amount of getting into your brain, settling where you are, meeting each other mentally, emotionally, getting on that plane of existence and dealing with various stressful things that had happened in the transport beforehand, being able to tell each other that and get there does feel a bit like what I do with myself in writing. You have a sort of circling, you have a flight plan, you know, when the planes are being held and they're circling.
Yeah. And you have to situate and everything. And I think like this sort of getting into the space and getting into the headspace, what we did here is probably an elongated version of what most people do when they're writing. Elongation caused by the fact that there's three of us, not just one, but actually a certain amount of this occurs when most people say, I'm going to write now, and then they have to clear off their desktop, find a place, put the headphones on, do all of these things that allow us to start. And yeah, that's sort of what we've ended up doing here today.
Absolutely.
And that, listeners, is us getting our excuses in before we've started.
That was how the dog ate my homework.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess we all suspect that all of you listeners have probably come up with excuses like that as well. And that's really what this podcast is about. It's about making time to write, but also, I guess, about making the best use of time when we have some, isn't it?
It totally is. And I guess for me, the permission and the forgiveness, depending on what's going on for you individually, you can be at one of two apparently completely different places that are actually identical. One is that there is loads of, let's call it procrastination. It's hard to get to the desk. It's hard to stay there once you're there. It's hard to feel worthy of the words that have or haven't come out. And that can be one problem. But the opposite can be true too, that there might be an awful lot going on. And I was actually just thinking about the example of James Graham did Desert Island Discs recently, and he was talking about workaholism and the time when he had 3 plays on in Covent Garden at the same time on the same street. They were actually across the road from each other. And he was saying to himself, now this is ridiculous, because it was as brilliant as it is. And as much as all of us would go, yeah, I wouldn't mind a slice of that, at the same time it represented to him that workaholism. Now, I am not using James Graham being brilliant as an excuse to not do writing. That is not what I mean. But the way that we can have a go at ourselves, and the way that I think we do kind of have a picture in our head that there's an ideal midpoint, when actually, I guess the thing that has helped me is a little bit of mercy, that I will do a bit each day, but what that bit looks like each day will be different, and how long it takes me to get in the zone and get the coffee and get the thing done, it does change. So it's not like your pattern is going to look absolutely the same each day.
And I think that there's a pressure almost with that, example that you just gave, that a proper writer is productive all the time and is doing something all the time and achieving something all the time. And it doesn't matter how many famous writers say, no, 90% of writing is staring out of the window. You always get this impression that actually they're being very self-effacing, and when they sit down, they churn out the genius. And it's so difficult, and it's not like that at all.
And at the same time, one of my very old friends said to me very recently, what about when you're not inspired? And the thing is, when you're doing that for a living, you just want to laugh and cry at the same time, because, you know, there's that wonderful quote about, I just make sure I'm inspired at 9 o'clock each weekday morning. And the truth is that coming to your desk in a flood of, I feel like a writer, I have perfect confidence, that might produce the first draft faster than when you're having the opposite day. But actually the process isn't any different, is it? You know, you still have to do your first draft, you still have to work through it. The word in my head is crafting. If I'm having a day where it's just not flowing, you know, you can call it procrastination. I know I'm going to get less out of myself, but those days are part of it. So I do more crafting, or maybe driving on manual rather than automatic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And some of that does involve sitting there going, you know, and not every day is the same.
No.
Yeah, indeed.
Absolutely.
Well, and I know that you, as well as being writers, have other things going on in your lives, and you have through your
That is a
careers.
nuisance, yes.
Yes, this way.
But I mean, have there been times when finding the time to write, and I guess I mean creative writing, because I know you've both written professionally as well, but has that proved especially problematic for you?
Do you mean writing professionally as in copywriting?
As in, not creative writing.
Like not create. Well, I mean, it is still creative, but yes, I mean, we can look at the footnotes as much as that. That's a footnoted comment, I think. Yeah. Like
no, but it is a footnoted comment, but I think you and I had quite different experiences of this in a way, didn't we? That Emily, when I was a copywriter and I had gone into that thinking house style during the day, creative writing during the evenings and weekends. This is getting on 15, 20 years ago. I did not find that worked for me, whereas I found writing coaching and being part of the what do you want, how do we make what you want happen, that feeds me in a way that house style didn't. I felt more blocked by that, whereas when I'm working with people and it's their separate writing universe, and it's bringing them into that and bringing that out of them, that feels like a jigsaw that makes sense to me, whereas copywriting and editing full-time did not do that for me.
I definitely did it because I fell into it, and you know, it's a decent career. You sort of think, oh, I graduated in English literature and the chances of me getting a job actually writing were pretty slim, and I've managed to do that. And, you know, I'm doing it. And actually, like when I was a copywriter, I spent a few years as a medical writer. It's a very different type of writing. It's very much more constrained. What I did find that was quite difficult is, again, coming to the table every day, coming to the desk inspired, because you do still have to be able to get into that headspace. And a lot of jobs will say, oh, we're fine, we know that some days you're going to be able to do more than other days, but at the end of the day, when you've got a client waiting for you, you do have to do the work. You know, like you can't come in when there's a deadline and say, I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling it today, I'm going to probably do less. It's not really an option.
Now, it's important to say that finding the time to write is not just an issue for writers with day jobs and other things to balance in their lives. Even full-time professional writers struggle with making the time, as we heard a couple of weeks ago from Nigel Planer referring to his conversation with Ian Rankin. So you two are now doing much more kind of creative writerly things through much more of your lives. What are the things that take time away from you, and how do you overcome them?
Can I just go back to Nigel for a minute, because there was something he said that I loved hearing, because it's slightly different for me, but he talks about having this chair by his desk, and that sometimes what the subconscious needs is to go for a nap and come back and it will have done a lot or some of the work for you. With me, it's not napping. That always makes me feel slightly stressed. I'd never think that. But the going away and coming back, and I think, and this comes with not so much experience as the pattern side of experience. Having seen that this can happen a few times, you get less worried about it, less thinking it's procrastination, is walking off, doing something else and coming back. Because sometimes that's not procrastination. Actually, it's stress control. It's clarifying your mind. So in my more anxious moments, my instinct would have been to glue myself to the computer when it wasn't happening and try. When actually, if what I'd done was go for a walk, make coffee, which is the answer to most of my questions, or, go and actually read a book for 20 minutes, I find that if I do that, my brain and body then go, oh, that's it, and just take me back to the computer. And by going on what looks like a long route and what could look like procrastination, or actually you could have a go at yourself thinking this is procrastination, actually that is a more thorough route that gets you there more authentically and organically than if you just stayed there Pritt-sticked to your screen. Well, young people know what Pritt-stick is.
I hope so.
Sticky adhesive in
We need that
lipstick
anymore.
containers.
Yeah, pretty much.
Maybe I didn't know what it was.
But in your instance there,
Yeah.
I mean, let's say you only had an hour. Half an hour of good writing within that hour was probably be better than an hour of dithering and not being sure what to do. So
let's say I was in the zone and that hour could be stuff is coming out. You don't want us to say vomit draft anymore because we freak you out too much.
I've given up.
Oh, good. Glad to know we won. But if I am in full flow, then that could be an hour that is really, really useful, even if eventually only a third of it gets in the final, whatever that is. You can't know that unless you've written it. So if I'm in that mood, sure, fine, absolutely. But if I'm not in that mood, if it is a case of what I feel like I can do, and this does happen quite frequently, is I can do maybe, 25 minutes or whatever of real stuff. I once had a singing teacher that talked about when I wasn't in the mood, she said, you're pretending to sing. You're going through the motions.
Oh, wow.
I still remember that if you are mentally not in the zone, that sometimes it's okay to say to yourself, this isn't working. It doesn't mean it's gone away forever, because that's the perfection procrastination trap, where you think because it's happening now, it's happening forever, and therefore you force yourself one way or you have a go at yourself the other way. It gets you out of that. If today is a day where I am more in that side of my brain, it's about forgiving myself and then using that half hour to do my weekly finances or listen to a podcast or do something that feeds me. I mean, the phrase that I absolutely love is the Stephen Covey sharpening the saw. And just in case anybody doesn't know that, the idea is you see somebody trying to chop down a tree in a forest and there's sweat pouring off them and they're sawing and sawing with their blunt saw, and you say, would you not want to maybe stop and sharpen your saw? And they say, I can't stop and sharpen my saw, I've got a tree to cut down. And that stress involved and that feeling that activity is an end product in itself, I've seen happen to so many people, and that very much used to be me. And activity is not efficiency.
No.
Quite often knowing how to sit back isn't procrastination, it's refueling. It's like we would never expect our car to get petrol as a reward for the journey, and yet we're doing that to ourselves the whole time.
I think it's like, I mean, if you're a narrative gardener, this sort of analogy will definitely hit home. But you plant tomatoes in soil that has been planted for the last couple of years. You need to fertilise the soil to get tomatoes. Because they won't grow, they won't do anything if there's no nutrients left in the soil for them to draw on to create the fruit. You need to fertilise, and I think that's exactly right. As soon as you're reading a book, as soon as you're reading, like even if you're taking a sort of like how to write book off the shelf that's written by somebody else, reading a chapter of that could be fuel. But one of the things that I always find, a while back when I was writing books 2 and 3 of the Dex trilogy, I got really into doing writing sprints. And I found a couple of people who were doing those at the same time. They were in Canada and I was obviously here. But the way our days aligned, we were hitting our writing time roughly at the same time. Our ideal peaks of I'm active at this time, you're active at that time. And we'd sit and it would be on video and we wouldn't talk or anything, we'd just write. Actually, I found that incredibly useful, and especially as you want balance in your life. You want to be able to do things with other people. You know, I'm married. I do want to spend time with my spouse. And it's very difficult sometimes to say, oh, I'm going to write today, and then spending a lot of time not writing, and then feeling frustrated that I haven't written, and then taking that frustration into whatever I do with my spouse because I haven't done what I feel like I needed to before I stopped working to spend time with them, which isn't ideal. So doing a couple of hours of sprints let me get what I needed to do done. And it's sort of normally in a 25-minute sprint, and then 10 minutes off, and then another 25 minutes to the hour, and then 10 minutes off, and then 25 minutes. And you sort of make up that 2 hours, you know, with 5 or 10 minute breaks in between. It can be a very, very efficient way to get stuff done. And if you do find that you work really well like that, it can really make a difference to your life. It's interesting how getting together with other writers and getting into that space really focuses you, because you can see other people focusing, you feel that focus, and it affects you, and it helps me at least. I mean, I think it's worth saying that with the Writers' Gym that you can join online, there are weekly sprints that you can do on a Monday, and they sort of kickstart your week as a writer and get you into that headspace. And then that's something that you can carry on, that energy. You know, there's something about starting right on a Monday that really sets you up for the rest of the week. Weirdly, if you start right on a Wednesday, it doesn't have quite the same effect. You start right on a Monday.
What we do now is we've got coffee and creativity on Wednesdays as the middle point. So we've got the 2 hours on the Mondays, and then the members only version on the Fridays. And then in the middle, we've got coffee and creativity, where there's the hour sprint and then there's the 50-minute chat at the side.
Nice.
The reason that I brought all of this together is it just works so well. And I like that people can set their own schedule, but know that you can see everyone else there, that community feeling, that sort of it takes a village feeling, that yes, I am on my own, but I'm also very importantly not.
Yeah.
I do love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess that's one of the things that tools like Zoom have given us. Previously, we might have had to rely on writers that lived nearby and finding a space where we could both go and sit. But, you know, as you said, connecting people across the Atlantic. And
and we've got one in Australia, we've got one in Washington, and I won't say all of them because I'll miss somebody and feel sad about it, but we've got people all over the place, and some come to what for us is the evening one, some come in the day. But that has been such a joy, because particularly with the members Voxer group, you can message each other. What I do with individual clients, and they also do in the group together, is right, Bum is hitting the chair at this time. Bum will not be moving from chair until have done this hour or this many words. And just making yourself accountable, just sending that text message and getting a message or an emoji or however you've decided to do it back. You're no longer alone. This is no longer the abyss. This is time is structured. Time has genuine boundaries on it that you have chosen that work for you, and it's
a bit
empowering.
Of peer pressure as well, presumably. The if I'm sitting on a Zoom call with 6 other people that are writing, I guess there's something about that environment, that atmosphere, that is probably more likely to make me want to write, even if I didn't really fancy it before I joined the call.
I mean, we had a thing in our sprints where at the end of the sprint we'd share our word count that we'd achieved. And obviously everybody writes differently. Some people would write 1,000 words in 25 minutes, and I would normally average about 500, like half of that. But at the same time, everybody writes very differently, and you can't compare really. But it's more about acknowledging your achievement, acknowledging that you did a thing in that 25 minutes. Nobody's judging each other. Nobody's saying, well, you need to up your pace. It's about saying, I got 500 words done that time.
Yeah,
and maybe I rejected 300 bad ones, or something as well. You know, so
and the 10 absolutely brilliant ones that you will find that stay in there at the end could only have happened with all of that. You mentioned about actually the structuring of time, and we've talked a bit about how it feels, but in terms of what you do, I'm going to bring up the exercise at the end, so maybe I shouldn't be saying this yet because this is a little bit of a spoiler for the exercise at the end, but as spoiler-free as I can manage. The thing that works enormously for me and that I've used with a lot of clients is the magic wand. So please lift it off your desk right now and go, what do I actually want my week to look like? And if I did have 10 minutes there, that I knew it wasn't a massive writing session where I could have a go at myself for not doing something brilliant, but if I had these 10 minutes before I pick up this child, or while I'm waiting outside the swimming pool, or whatever is going on in your life, where would I put those 10 minutes? And it's amazing how those 10 minutes actually then do rock up. And the difference between something perfect that doesn't get to happen at all and something imperfect that actually does clock up is joyful.
Yeah.
The magic wand being metaphorical or figurative.
The magic wand is both metaphorical and the most useful coaching tool on God's earth.
Could it be like a
stories
stick
we use
or
to
a
make
pen?
sense? No, I very deliberately use something invisible because then you've always got it with you.
Nice,
but we can talk about that at the end.
Do you have a magic wand, Emily?
Well, I mean, yes, it's mental. But what I do often when I'm sort of between things and need to jot down ideas, because sometimes, especially with audio drama writing, it's about script, it's about dialogue. So I'm having conversations in my head the entire time, even when I'm like doing tasks.
And sometimes out loud when you're walking around. Right?
Exactly.
That's
whisper
not just me.
conversations. No. Out loud walking around, mostly in whisper form. So I'm just walking around whispering to myself like a mad person. But then I have this sort of particular structure conversation, which I know is going to slot into the narrative somewhere. And I have to go and write it down. But if I'm on the go, I write it in a draft email on my phone. And then my draft email folder is just full of little bits of conversation and little bits of script that I can then lift and put into episodes. And they might not stay the same. Once I've written the bits around and the bits at the end, like I might edit them, but it's amazing how much goes in there that is just written in those in-between phases.
I love the phone notebook for that same principle, but for me it's the phone notebook and being able to get into a this doesn't count space and then paste it into a Word document later works enormously well for me.
My tool of choice is actually OneNote, which is the Microsoft tool. We'll never promote Microsoft again. But the beauty of it is it can be both something you scribble in. It's got templates for lists, tables, all sorts of things. But you can also record a voice note into it. You can also take a photo when you're out and about, and then you turn on your computer back on your desk and it's all there synced by the cloud, which is lovely. So,
sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
And so much about being able to use the limited time we have efficiently is about the research, the gathering, the structuring, the having the notes to work from when we get that hour, isn't it?
And I have to say, like, being able to start an hour with a little bit that you've already written that you then put in is so much easier, because you're like, okay, so how do I then slice this in? It becomes like a sort of exercise to kickstart your writing that day. Is, not I'm going to get 500 words down, but I've got 500 words. How do I make them fit in the rest? Yeah. And then in a sprint, I will count that 500 words because I've done them elsewhere and they are now in the book. And it works.
Which shows you how important it is just to take the mental picture you have of it and realise how much of the mindset is the reality, that what you've done there is you've said this works for me, this many words count. And the thing is that we're scoring for ourselves, but that doesn't discredit it. It actually does the opposite. It shows that how you feel about your writing has a direct effect on what you do and the quality and the time that you put into it. And if you find what makes you feel good, you get better work out of yourself.
Absolutely. Yep.
So how much do we think then that planning and structuring is important, so that we never have an hour where we sit down and think, I wonder what I'm going to do with my hour?
Oh no, I make sure I have time where I don't know what I'm going to do, because
elaborate.
Depends what else is going on work-wise. If somebody's paying me to do such and such a thing by Thursday lunchtime, then those hours get programmed in. But even when those hours are taking over, I even do that stuff better when I have regular hours where I don't know what I'm going to do. And you write yourself back into it. Once you get over the inspiration addiction, once you get over the idea that you write only when it's already arrived in your head. Now, don't get me wrong, that works for some people out there, but for everyone it actually works for, there's a bunch thinking that's what they're supposed to do to be proper writers. And they tend to not be doing a lot of writing. So there will be times when I've got an idea and I just want to explore it. Or there will be times when I had an idea last week, forgot to write it down, and if I start writing it, it'll gradually find its way back up through all of the mess of everything else that's going on in the universe and onto the page. But yeah, I absolutely make sure that I have what I call candle time, because it means going over to the sofa with the journal or the notebook and babysitting the candle, because when there's a candle there, I know I can't get up and do the washing because you've got to keep an eye on the candle. Now, the candle isn't always literal. Like the magic wand, it works just as well if it isn't there. But I do need it. And you do that, don't you, Emily? You do sort of hours on the sofa thinking about things and it comes out, doesn't it?
Yeah, sometimes. Okay, so one of the things that I do is, I mean, I think we did a whole episode on music and listening to music and things, but sometimes putting the headphones on and just listening to music is incredibly inspirational. And you can really sort out scenes just by listening to the music and making them kind of soundtrack. But one of the things that I want to sort of mention here is the vending machine of our brains, like the vending machine of my brain, for instance. The first layer of the vending machine, and I'll have ideas, and those ideas will bother me for a long time until I write them down. And as soon as I write them down, those ideas are done. They're on the page, they're sorted. The next layer of the vending machine comes forward and I can see it. And then I have to wiggle that and get it down, get all of that layer out. And then I can see the next layer. And if I don't get it down, then it's stuck on the front, and I'll be like, oh, okay, I've had an idea for that conversation that's going to happen in that episode. But it's going to be there in my head, bothering me and getting in the way of new ideas that could come forward. And it's like having something stuck in the vending machine, then you're like shaking it. Your brain is shaking it, trying to get it out. Yeah. And it's like, no, just write it down. Vroom, that layer done. Yeah. What's the new bit? Vroom. And it means that in between things, when I'm thinking of ideas and writing draft emails, the new stuff is coming forward. And I'm getting more done in the in-between times.
It's such a beautiful image, because I think for some people there'll be something crisps and there'll be something chocolate bar, there'll be different kinds of writing going on. But overall, if you see it like that, that's fine. But if you just see it like there's one project at a time, either way, that is so true, that when you can get them out of yourself and into a notebook, you're not carrying them around in the same way. I realise we're not technically carrying a vending machine around. That may be
I think I might be.
Maybe we're all carrying a vending machine.
We are all carrying a vending machine.
See, I have vending machines for me have bad connotations, because I think there's a rule of vending machines that the more you want that bag of cheese and onion crisps, the more it's likely to be the bag of cheese and onion crisp that kind of teeters on the edge and doesn't quite drop down.
Yeah.
So,
although that
do
does
like
work though as an idea thing, that when you are very, very involved in an idea, I'm not saying this is how physical vending machines work, although it can blooming well feel like it. But if you really want it to come out and you're thinking about how great it'll be when it comes out, that will feel like that thing getting stuck.
And maybe we should just order the Mars bar for now.
Well, the thing is, some people do. Some people go and order something different. But what I would say do is keep writing that bag of crisps and don't think that something imperfect landing in your notebook is not having that. Get the thing you want
You
out.
can edit the bag of crisps
into that's just not even
better. No, suddenly we've lost the metaphor.
Other snacks are available.
And I'm thinking about food now.
Yes, yeah.
And you can also get bananas and apples out of these machines. So
if you are now hungry,
it's Chris's fault.
It's Chris's fault, and
Inkpen, you started this. So I'm going to move on now, because I think we ought to think about some positive things about time and often our lack of it. Are there, do we think, any positives about having a small amount of time? I mean, Emily, you've mentioned your writing sprints, but is there something about just having an hour that makes us use that hour more efficiently than we would 1 hour in a block of 5 that we have, for example?
Can I tell you a really efficient way of summoning writer's block? A really efficient way of summoning writer's block is to take a year off work.
Or
book a really expensive hotel somewhere beautiful.
Yeah, and say, I will write the whole time. And think that the world will supply that for you. Whereas, as the great Ben Folds has made us aware, everywhere I go, damn, there I am. Yeah.
So it's not to say don't book writing holidays, for God's sake, book writing holidays, but empty time and the pressure you put on yourself is a surefire way of summoning all the writer's block you can find. I'm not saying you won't get anything done, but I am saying, yes, Chris, I believe there are very, very good things about having the odd hour here and there.
Yeah.
Like the, oh, what the hell, I'll just do a bit of writing. How bad can it be? Oh, well, it's quite bad, but I can make it better because guess what? It exists.
The pressure cooker analogy works here because, on the daily, you want to be letting off a little bit of steam, or like on the regular, not necessarily on the daily, but depending on how you work and how your pressure cooker works, you got to be letting off steam in order to not go insane. Yep. If you think to yourself, I've got a week here, you're likely to think, I won't do anything on the daily because I'm saving it all up, right? Now, a pressure cooker can explode with quite a lot of violence. Now, if your pressure cooker explodes in that time, you're going to spend that week off doing DIY, repairing the damage of the pressure cooker exploding. You're not going to be getting decent work done. This analogy sort of like, I don't know if you're getting this sort of...
It's brought to you by IKEA, I am.
Yes, yeah.
I do love a well-stretched analogy.
Yeah, but it's the way
You're in the right place.
I always think of myself as the writing pressure cooker, right? But I do know that this mentality is sort of like, oh, well, I'm going to be writing then, so I won't write now. And then you get to then, and everything else needs doing. Because you've kind of thought, oh, I'll do that then. I'll do this then. I'll have a productive week, so I'll do all of these things then. And there is no then. With the writing, just do it now. Just do it now. Just do it when you can.
Yeah. Paul McCartney's father had that as a phrase, do it now. That was a phrase he grew up with. And DIN, do it now. And I loved that. I knew about it as a kid because I was a Beatles fan from the age of 10. I just thought they were the most wonderful thing that had ever happened. And still will say that. But yeah, the idea that if it's worth doing, then it's worth doing. Not just thinking about, not just leaving in that. And that's something as a musician, but also as a business person, as somebody who knew how to be nice to people and get the job done. I admire him as a writer because, not just because I admire him as a writer, but because I admire him about making the world help you do the thing, not by waiting for the world to tell you it's okay to do it, but by thinking of the ways that are going to work for you and making it happen.
I think a lot of people think, oh God, we've all been at that party where somebody says, what do you do? And you say, I'm a writer. And they say, oh, I'm going to write a book when I have time. Or I'm going to write a book. I wish I had time to write a book. Or I'm going to write a book when I retire. Those classic statements. Yeah. And it's like, no, if you were going to write a book, you'd write a book. Because nobody has time to write a book. Nobody has the time to sit down. Nobody's thinking, I'm at a loose end, I will now write a novel. It's not the case. If you are writing, you want to write the book.
Yeah.
With that, I have just put on my shelf behind me at home this gorgeous little tin I got off Etsy with there will be time for 100 visions and revisions, the proof rock. And I did not see that as a quote about procrastination at all. I saw it as the opposite. I saw it as it's not about doing something brilliant and immediate. It's about doing something because there will be time to make it better and better. And then when I looked on Etsy at what I just bought, they actually described that as the procrastination quote. And for me, that was the opposite. And I was writing about time a lot on Substack because my own sort of psychotherapeutic and coaching journey was all about relationship with time. I was around a lot of people who, certainly in the community that I was in at the time, were doing a lot of work for free, and it was every day. If you were doing that, then that was a point of pride. I mean, they loved what they were doing, don't get me wrong, but that was what I was growing up in, was I don't have time. I don't have time. And the truth is time is all I have.
But I think that's the difference between I'm waiting to have time and I am making time.
Exactly.
Or I am spotting the moments when I can do something.
Exactly.
Because a lot of people who don't have time will be sitting in a car listening to the radio for 10 minutes because they don't have time to do something else. Whereas if you are finding the time, you'll think, I've got 10 minutes. I'll write something. And it's viewing that 10 minutes differently.
Thinking creatively about what you're doing with your life, with what is available.
Exactly.
And never just waiting for it to be self-evident.
Presented to you as, I now have time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Time is arriving on a winged chariot.
Exactly.
We're coming towards the end of this episode. I want to just do a couple of quick fire potential problems of having limited time to write. And one of them, I guess, is that, let's assume that your project, let's assume it's a novel. How do you ensure consistency and continuity when you only have little snatched bits of time here and there when you're working on a long project like that?
Over the period of the last best part of 10 years, I have been moving my life through very small, authentic steps towards having writing time in the mornings. And my working life and my personal life are better if I'm writing than if I'm not. I mean, I was saying before, you get better Rachel for your money if I'm writing than if I'm not. I'm going to be doing all of the things I do better. So I have learned to know that I'm investing in everybody else when I do that. So the emotional part of that is helped by that. And really, for me, that's what it's all about, is finding what works for you, not your idealised form of what works for you or your idealised view of what would work for a writer and what being a writer looks like, but what actually gets you writing. And then slowly, not all at once, by experimenting, making that jigsaw fit is a big thing.
I mean, Emily, your project is and has been bigger than most. The depths,
creating a whole IP across
trilogy
multiple,
and audio drama series, increasingly
and
inaccurately
also a game
named
now as well.
So
narrative game.
What's the secret then to consistency, so that your character isn't a hermit one minute and going to discos the next? What's the secret?
I mean, a hermit can go to discos; they won't necessarily
challenge
enjoy
accepted.
Yes, exactly. I think the difference,
really bad example.
I think that it's about. I mean, my characters exist in my head as human beings, and that helps. They are wherever they are themselves and knowing them. But that comes from having the conversations in my head constantly when I'm doing the washing up or when I'm going for my walk in the morning, when I'm listening to music and choosing the music that I know I associate with the book that I'm writing with those characters. All of that in-between stuff means that it's so much easier to just settle into them as characters. And all of my stuff is character driven. So as long as I know them and as long as I'm keeping up with them in the in-between stages, I can settle into them wherever I am. And I think that's how I do it. I've never really thought about that before, but that is how I do it, I think. In the shower. I have a lot of conversations in the shower.
Yeah.
Rachel, you alluded a moment ago to being a morning writer. Emily, I know that late nights are good times for you to write.
Yes.
What is it about those kind of bookends of the day, as it were, that make good writing times for different sorts of people?
I just find that my creative brain falls off. I mean, I'll get into sort of second wind later in the day, but for whatever reason, that is what my brain does. And I'm not avoiding the question in saying this, but I would, for myself, for anybody struggling to find the time, I prioritise the question, what works? Because if you get too deeply into why, I'm not saying it's not interesting because it's fascinating, but it can take you away from making the habits fit your life. So that is the health warning I will stick on this. Or by going, it just kind of is, really.
I think you can train yourself to a degree. Like, you can get into a rhythm. It's like some people really like the sort of routine of, I will get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I will write between 6:30 and 7:30 and then I will get ready for work and blah, blah, blah. I am much more of because my brain sort of kicks in around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, weirdly. Like, I am very much a PM person. And as a result, I can do my best writing between 10 and 1 o'clock in the morning. That's my sort of natural writing time. And it's very frustrating that the world doesn't allow people to do that. I heard a thing that was like back in the day when people were, hunter-gathering, or people who live in tribes. Night owls are just put on night watch.
Yeah.
And, there's work to be done in the tribe at night time, just as there is during the day. And people just settle into their natural rhythm.
These days we're 9 to 5 people, aren't we?
Yeah,
and we have to be.
It's, it's definitely set up for the morning people, and you're seen as more productive if you are a morning person.
Almost more virtuous.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of virtue signalling if you do start things very early. And I am much the opposite. I am very late.
On the other end of that, I would argue there is, I don't know if it's virtue signalling precisely, but it's certainly coolness virtue signalling. That if you're a late night person, then you're just cooler. But the thing that always stuck with me was Lisa Jewell in her completely no nonsense, extremely successful way going, look guys, my children get dropped off at school at this time, I have to pick them up at this time. That is how I write this many novels, because she's not giving herself any extra time that she doesn't have. She just doesn't have it in those ways, and it's a good way in because it removes the perfectionism procrastination spinning coin, because that's what we're all in the end trying to step around.
And finally, I think that there is the thing about distraction, isn't there? And maybe early in the morning and late at night, there are fewer distractions available to us. But
if a woman is to write, she needs a room of one's own. Somebody very famous said that. Yes, Virginia Woolf. Money and a room of one's own.
Enough money to be able to shut the door. Because what she was talking about was not having a massive, massive house. It was just about being able to get out of the motherhood, what do other people need space enough to be able to concentrate on your own mind.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that I don't, my office is not the office, it is our living room, and I shut the door during the day, and my partner has his office that he works in. And yes, there's luck. If you want to say we're lucky, we're lucky. If you want to say we've worked really, really hard to work out what works for us and to make it work, this did not land magically. And it's hard. So the room of one's own, it can be a cupboard, God knows we'd rather it wasn't, and a window is helpful and things like that. But finding the permission to be not selfish in the way that word gets used, but to know what you need and to know that it's up to you to make it happen is where that magic wand comes in.
I was reading a sort of account of a very famous writer who had a deadline but was also pregnant and having a baby, and 6 months after the baby was born, she handed the toddler and the baby over to her husband and just said, right, they're yours for the next 3 months because I've got a book to write. And he did it. And that is more incredible than it should be.
Yes.
Because if it was the other way round, it would be a case of, well, of course she did. She's the mother. And, that's her job to support the husband in doing what he needs to do and supporting his goals. It happened the other way around. And he was like, that's absolutely fine. You've got to write. You've got a deadline. And I'm the father. I'm equally responsible for these children. I will make sure they're going to school on time. I will make sure they're picked up. I will make sure that everything's, fine. And I think that you are very lucky if you can work as a team. But there is something incredible about being able to work as a team that allows you to do so much more.
And God bless the shut door.
Absolutely.
Indeed. So, Rachel.
Hello.
Do you have, shall we say, a bit more about our exercise for today?
So, I'm going to call this a creative I dare you. Humour me. If you don't think it's going to work, that's fine. If you don't think I understand how busy you are, that's also fine. My creative I dare you is this. Look at a week of your life. If you have a diary, look at it. If you have a blank piece of paper, draw it. And pick up that imaginary magic wand that we mentioned earlier and go, if I could design my week, what would it look like? And start designing. Just humour me. I am not saying that you're going to have enough money to do this forever, but I am saying if you look at it in the eye and know what it is you actually want, then the pieces of it that you can make happen, you will also know are pieces of what you could do to make it happen. That is my creative I dare you.
Excellent.
Yep.
Well, listeners, good luck with making the time to write. And as
not
always,
finding, making.
Yes, carve that time out. Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Thank you for listening to the Writer's Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writers' Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writers' Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writers' Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.